Good morning. Good morning, everyone. We see that some of you are logging in. A few of you have been in the wait room, so thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, thank you. So it is our last Friday together, our second and last time together. So I do want to thank you again for joining. My name is Diana Arias with the Community Technical Assistance Center at NYU's McSilver Institute. And again, welcome to Partnering with Youth, Part 2, Youth Guided Practice. As we give folks a minute just to log in, I invite you to share your name and your role. Hopefully some of you were here with us for part 1. If you weren't, welcome, welcome. If you haven't been here for part 1, we do invite you to listen to the training and watch the video, which is posted on our website, mcsilverta.org. So if you can do that in the chat box, if you'd like just to share some information about you, that would be great. And as you're chatting, I did want to take a moment to orient everyone on the following slide. Just some housekeeping issues so you know how to participate in today's event. This is a meeting format, which means that we have muted all of you just to make sure that we are not distracting either the presenters or you all as audience members. Also, just to cover all of the material that we do want to get covered, we invite you to enter any questions or comments that you have directly in the chat box. We'll address them in real time or in the Q&A portion. So we will have that in the end. So again, please submit your questions, your feedback using the chat box at any point in time during the webinar. And I do also want to remind you, if you would like, whatever works best for you, you can keep the chat box open or you can close it out. I know we had a lot of great participations, which is great. It might be distracting also, not just for folks to hear voices in the background or sounds, but also to have the chat box, which was moving a mile a minute last time. So again, feel free to also close that out. If you have any issues or have any feedback, please feel free to reach out to us. I do also want to mention that AR bots are not permitted to join our offerings. So we do recommend using the live closed captions or the transcript feature in Zoom as an alternative. The slides and recording for the presentation will be posted on our website, mcsilverta.org, also within the next 3 to 5 business days, and the transcript will be uploaded within the next 2 weeks. And lastly, if you come across any technical issues during today's event, please chat to Felicia, the CTech admin, who will be able to assist you. I don't know if there's any delays on my end, but I'm still seeing the first title slide. So I'm just going to be moving us to the third slide, Title 3, Continuing Education Credits. So as a reminder for folks, if you attended the live viewing of part 1 last Friday and you're here now today, you are eligible for a total of 3 CEs. Unfortunately, there is no partial credit. And you are eligible if you are a licensed social worker, a mental health counselor, a marriage and family therapist, psychoanalyst, or psychologist. Again, you must be in attendance at least 75% of each of the 2 offerings. And you must be logged in using your own Zoom generated link. So there's no sharing of links with other colleagues. If there's a couple of you in a room, you all will not be able to get CEs. For CE purposes only, you really need to be using your own Zoom generated link. And also be attending this using a computer, as unfortunately a cell phone is not acceptable for CE purposes. So for those of you who are eligible for CEs, you will be receiving a detailed email within the next 1 to 3 business days after today's webinar. And with that, a good amount of housekeeping issues, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kara, to get us started.
Thank you, Diana. Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to be with you again. Hopefully everyone here participated in part 1 of our training. But if not, you can go onto our website and see that. Today, we are continuing our conversation around partnering with youth, really focused on strategies. So if we could go to the next slide, I just want to go over our agenda. Well, actually, let me start here. So when we ended our time together on last Friday, we asked for everyone to complete the youth provider survey with at least one person you work with. So chat into us. Tell us how it went. Were you able to use it? If you did, how did it go? Or if anybody wants to unmute, we would love to hear from you. So the youth provider survey was the feedback survey that we sent around, and we put it in the chat. Was anybody able to use it? Oh, thank you, Felicia. My colleague Felicia just put it in the chat again, just for a reminder. And if you didn't do that, was there anything else that oh, you shared it with a lot of people. You didn't get to use it. Um, oh, you were going to use it with somebody, but they canceled. Thank you. Uh, Lorica says, I am bummed because I didn't get to use it. My client canceled. Austin said, did not get to use it, but shared it with a lot of people. Thank you. Jennifer said, I was not. I had 2 appointments with teens who had needs that required priority. Understandable. Marie said, wasn't able to use it yet. Nellie, unfortunately, was not able to use it, having issues with Zoom coming back in. No worries. So it sounds like a lot of you weren't able to use it yet. Oh, Dawn, your client wouldn't do it. I'm curious about that. What do you want to share more? Would you want to come off mute? They were having a hard time. Okay. Amy said we don't have any kids in the program, but you've saved it. Fantastic. Okay. They were having a really bad day. Okay. So the kind of other priorities. I understand. That's what Dawn was saying, that their client wouldn't do it because they were having a really bad day. Got it. Well, the idea again, just for this, just for you to take away is that you're just you're gathering feedback from the young person that you're working with in terms of how's it going. Remember, we split it in the beginning of care and the ongoing care. And it could be a really great foundation for really good open communication and creating this culture of feedback between the young person and yourself, which is always leads to a really authentic partnership, which is what we're going to continue talking about today. Anybody else have an opportunity to use a survey? No worries if not, because guess what? There's always more time. Okay, we can go to the next slide. This is our agenda for today. We're going to start again with our youth-led fireside chat with Megan and Muhammad. We're going to move into talking about overcoming barriers afterwards, and then move into talking about performative and authentic engagement, talking about communication skills for partnership, and then collaboration skills for partnership. And then we're going to talk about family dynamics with the youth and caregiver in terms of really creating authentic relationships and partnership. We're also going to end with Megan and Muhammad sharing some key takeaways for you all and doing a poll question with you all in terms of like your experience in the training and what you're going to start doing, stop doing, or continue doing. And so just if you want to like kind of reflect towards the end, we will invite you to do that. And then there'll be a little post survey, as Diana mentioned, for the CEs, not for CEs, but also for feedback as well. So, and we'll have hopefully a little Q&A time as well. Next slide. Again, this is our team. So you met us last week, but here we are again. Diana opened us. I'm Kara, and you'll hear from Muhammad and Megan, and we are your partnering with youth team. And then next slide. And we will now move to our fireside chat with Megan and Muhammad. And we're going to start by asking, when you were receiving services, what did the provider do to help you feel safe enough to share your honest thoughts and your needs?
For me, when I was young, I often felt judged by providers, especially through their body language. Oftentimes, this would include like eyebrow raises, shaking their head, or giving me like a disappointed look. And as a traumatized youth, I was very hyper vigilant to other people's reaction to me out of self-preservation, because sometimes I would be like, so this person was going to act one way based on their body language, and I would usually be right. And these small body movements and facial expression would make me feel less safe because I'm already being judged at home, and now I'm being judged by a person who's supposed to help me. And this was even before I shared my experiences. And this was if I was asked about my experiences at all.
Thank you, Mohammed. Megan, did you want to share any of your thoughts?
I'm sorry, I was muted when I had started speaking.
Okay.
So yeah, Muhammad, I also have experienced hypervigilance to other people's body language, and this really originated from my experience surviving violence. But I want to know, do you still feel judged about how a provider's body language, and does that still impact you?
Really, it's only in my adulthood years that I began to work with a provider who is thankfully still my current provider that didn't feel judged through their body language or facial expression. And it wasn't that they were completely poker faced, but rather they would shake their head to nod and affirm what I was saying. Their arms weren't crossed, and their body language told me that they weren't making me feel judged or they weren't judging me at all. And this not only eased any of my anxious feelings, but I also had the opportunity to speak with them honestly and freely. And this was and is really helpful, especially as I'm still recovering from being hypervigilant. And I truly wish that this level of emotional safety was provided to me when I was a youth. So I want to turn the question back to you, Megan. Like, did you ever feel judged by a provider?
So, not exactly. I did have a time where I was very afraid that my provider would judge me for one of my decisions. And because I feared she would judge me, I didn't tell her about a new relationship right away. At 19, I had actually started dating someone who was over 10 years older than me. And I kept this a secret from my parents and from my counselor because of all the stigmas surrounding an age gap like that.
I understand what you mean because that stigma and judgment can still be hurtful even in our early adult years.
For sure. And, it was an unhealthy situation, but I wasn't ready to hear that in the moment. I didn't want someone to respond in a way that I found judgmental or I viewed as an overreaction at the time. And, because my boyfriend wasn't physically abusive in my mind based on my past experiences, I didn't think he was abusive at all. And then after several months, I finally brought this relationship up to my counselor because I was very uncomfortable with something that he had done. And I then told her I hadn't mentioned my boyfriend earlier in our sessions because I was afraid she would judge me for being in a relationship with an older man.
I understand that, especially as a teen who's experienced both shame and judgment. I know where your thought process was at, but also as an adult, I also understand why a therapist would be concerned about that relationship dynamic. So I also want to ask that did you end up feeling safe to tell your counselor about the details of your relationship?
Actually, yes, I did get to that point, and it was because when I had told my counselor why I didn't share with her, she actually said, "I'm not going to judge you, and if I judge you for your decisions, then I'm not doing my job right." And that was huge for me. After that, I significantly opened up to her, thoroughly providing details about my relationship, how it developed, why, in my mind, I considered it a healthy relationship, but also how the relationship was impacting me. And, because through that statement, she had built an environment of psychological safety, I began to trust her with deeper things that I had shame, secrecy, or self criticism about. And her saying what she did was a major turning point in our partnership, trust building, and how I actively chose to engage in therapy.
And it really seems from our experiences that when a provider creates that environment of emotional safety and non-judgment, we begin to open up and share details about our life. And feeling safe enough to open up allowed our counselors to help us even more effectively because they knew more information related to what we were going through.
Absolutely. I feel that when counselors use strategies to specifically create a type of safety, it can definitely lead to building stronger partnerships. And it also benefits both the provider in giving care to the youth and in the youth receiving care.
Thank you, Mohammed and Megan. Chat in any takeaways you have from their experiences and from what their providers did to help them feel safe to share their thoughts and their needs. And while you do that, I just wanted to kind of revisit Megan's experience with intimacy and how Megan now has some insight around how it was somewhat, clouded by previous experiences because of harm from adults in your life. Did you want to speak to that at all, Megan?
Yeah, so when a young person, and I say this as, a teenager or a young adult, our mental perception of things is actually altered by the trauma we have survived. So, with being in relationships or being exposed to violent relationships in adults in my life, I only associated abuse to physical violence, right? So it was very hard for me in my mind to recognize any other type of abuse. And in that moment, not receiving judgment or not receiving my counselor like scolding me and immediately saying you need to get out of that relationship or it's not healthy or I feel that this is dangerous for you was actually really impactful in me feeling safe because I didn't think she was overreacting. And then once she reassured me of my safety in those sessions was when I really felt comfortable opening up. And then once I was able to open up more, then she was able to help me reframe my perspectives on that relationship and on the behaviors that were occurring.
Thank you so much. And I think also there are some other important takeaways, for example, self-determination, right? As well as engaging in non-judgment every step of the way. And so some of you also chatted in around creating that safety and how important that is. And a good reminder, Rebecca said, this is also a good reminder to pay attention to subtle body language. We usually just think about the more overt body language. Yes, we're going to talk a little bit about that later today and how, and Dawn says emotional safety is vital. Yeah, and it's also thank you, Mohammed and Megan, because you're also what you're saying is really informs meaningful engagement and collaboration and ultimately healing. And so both of you shared that as well. So thank you so much. You can go to the next slide.
Okay, so we're just going to take a quick refresher about overcoming barriers. In part one of our training, we really took a deep dive into the barriers that providers, youth, and families may experience that impact active engagement. So we have these four categories. We have systemic and organizational. We have practical and concrete. We have the family ecology, and then we have perceptual and attitudinal barriers. And although we're not going to spend too much time getting into the definitions and the specific barriers for these four categories, throughout our training, we are going to consistently be providing strategies to address the barriers that we discussed in part one. We can move to the next slide. So, one of the new foundational concepts that we wanted to introduce today was recovery-oriented care. And this is an essential component to authentic engagement because it is actively involving the youth and it goes beyond just treating the youth for their diagnosis. Recovery-oriented care is really connected to several frameworks as well and that we reviewed in part one. And throughout the rest of part two, we're really going to be providing more information on recovery care and how that shows up in different strategies of active engagement. So, recovery oriented care involves personal choice and empowerment. And that's really important for youth when they feel like they don't have choices or they're not being empowered for that personal advocacy. We also talk about holistic and strength-based supports and approaches, and that's something that we're also very familiar with when it comes to strength-based approaches for providing care. And then respect and inclusion is also really important because we want services that are promoting dignity, culturally responsive, and are collaborating with the individual, the family, and the community, which is both part of youth guided care and trauma informed care. We can move forward.
And as we are thinking about recovery-oriented care and its importance to authentic engagement, it's important for us to also understand how authentic engagement looks like with youth, but also what is performative engagement. So that way we're aware of what the two are and how we cannot engage in performative youth engagement. So authentic engagement really reflects the youth guided principle of shared decision-making and informed choice because it ensures that youth are actively shaping their goals, the process, and outcomes rather than being passively included, which is really where performative engagement comes in. Since performative engagement really involves more of a symbolic inclusion of youth without having any real influence or shared power, and that often limits in terms of, we see that in limited meaningful outcomes with youth. So in performative engagement, it occurs when providers prioritize adult goals and comfort over the actual partnership with youth. And youth are often seen as problems to fix rather than actual collaborators because we want to emphasize that youth are experts on their own experiences and their care. And youth voice oftentimes may be requested, but it's not really integrated to make actual change. And validation is often used as a way to steer youth into a desired acceptable behavior. And as a provider is speaking with the youth in terms of their partnering language, it may really be adult directed decisions maxed as partnering language. We also see that in choice, it's really adult defined options rather than youth defined. And any cautious behavior, because remember, we're not saying resistance, we're saying cautious behavior, it's framed as non-compliance. So now that we know what performative engagement is, what does authentic engagement really entail in terms of its strategies? Well, shared decision-making and validation without steering are important because we want providers to collaborate with youth on goals and sessions directed by them rather than setting predetermined objectives. And empathy is really essential because we want to provide empathy without attaching it to a behavior change. And we'll learn more about it as we're talking about unconditional positive regard. And this approach is really centering youth's priorities and affirms their experiences without really redirecting them towards adult preferred outcomes or adult, preferred behaviors. Because again, youth are the experts on themselves. And meaning first exploration and transparent power acknowledgement are also central to authentic engagement because providers, they seek to understand the purpose and the context behind a behavior rather than attempting to change it right out the bat. And there's also this open discussion of power dynamics, of systemic influences and roles, especially when you're working with marginalized youth. And this clarity is really important because it allows youth to understand what they can control while also minimizing any external pressures, such as any external pressures they might be experiencing from their parents. And in addition to that, authentic engagement really requires pacing the services to align with the youth's readiness and approaching the interactions with curiosity over correction. So this is where you would pace the treatment based on the youth stage of change rather than the external pressures. Again, oftentimes those might be parents who are dictating what the youth's behavior needs to be, rather than what the youth actually wants to work on. And they also prioritize understanding over immediately reframing or correcting thoughts and behaviors. Because again, we're moving away from power over and really with power with. So I would like to do a quick activity with everyone because we see a chart here that determines us shifting our perspective from performative engagement to authentic engagement. So in the first row, intent, for performative engagement, it says to appear youth-centered without shifting power. So what do you think the intent might be for authentic engagement? And you can drop the answers in the chat. To be youth-centered, to sharing power, yeah. So now I'm going to ask the opposite. In the authentic engagement, where we see mindset, it says youth are experts in their lives and youth are partners. So that is for authentic engagement. Now, when we look at performative engagement, what kind of mindset would that be? Now that we're doing the reverse. Checking boxes. So we see that in the authentic engagement, it really means in terms of intent to genuinely share that power and center the youth's voices. And in the performative engagement, when we're talking about mindset, it's really about providers knows best. Youth are the service recipient. It's just checking off the box of this is what they got. This is what we need to do. We just got to move on. It's a check box rather than actual collaboration and communication with them. And I also want to highlight in terms of action, we want to move away from maintaining control to co-creating goals and decisions with youth. And for outcomes, we want youth to feel less tokenized and actually hold meaningful change and roles that specifically helps, historically oppressed communities. So as we're talking about communication, especially partnering with youth, we want to ensure that we have effective communication that involves delivering messages clearly, respectfully, and assertively, which is different from aggressively. So assertive is just being respectful, but also being firm in your, what you're saying, whilst also maintaining adaptive communication that requires one to adjust their tone, language, and approach to properly meet the developmental and relational needs of the youth, young adults, and caregivers. And one of the ways we can do that is through active listening, because it really involves fully attending to a speaker's word, tone, emotions, and their intent, whilst using those intentional responses to understanding. So as I was saying in my personal experience, like the provider was nodding their head, they kept their body language open, it really let me know that they were actively listening to me. And this also ensures that the speaker feels heard, they feel validated, and most importantly, they accurately understand through both verbal and nonverbal feedback that their input is being included in the services, especially for teens who may not have had that opportunity to feel like that. We really want to emphasize that we're there with them. We're doing the work with them, not necessarily for them. So we're going to share a video, and this will further elaborate on why it's important to not interrupt, offer unsolicited solutions, and also just being mindful of paraphrasing when we're working with youth.
A good active listener. Number one, and this is hard, that is do not interrupt. So when someone comes up to you in conversation, the first thing you want to do is put your device down, give them full attention, good eye contact, and then you got to zip it up and not talk. Let them talk, ask them questions about what they're saying, bring out those feelings because feelings are really important, and just let them talk. There's going to come a time in the conversation, maybe towards the end, where you're going to be able to share your thoughts. But when someone is talking to you, do not interrupt, because when you interrupt, you're letting them know that what they're saying is not important. And now it's become about you and your story. And so a lot of people, when they're in conversation, they're already planning what they're going to say next. And so they're not fully listening, and then they tend to interrupt and not let that person finish their thought, finish their story. So it's really important that you do not interrupt and you let them express exactly what they want to express. Number 2, do not offer advice, solutions to their problems. Most of the time when people come to you to talk to you, they just want to be heard. They want support, they want acknowledgement, and they want someone to hear them out. They're not looking for someone to tell them that they're doing things wrong or a better way of doing things. That's not what they want. They want someone to fully hear them out. And so that means you're not going to jump in there with your own judgments. You're not going to jump in there and give them a solution. You're going to let them come up with their own solutions to their problems. And that is exactly what people do when they go to psychology and they sit down in that chair and they just talk, and the psychologist will ask them, so what do you think can be done to help solve this problem? What do you think are some steps you can take to fix this situation? And so as you do that, the person is able to give you feedback on what is the best way. And if they ask you for help and for advice, you can surely give it. Maybe there will be a point in the conversation towards the end where you can give some suggestions, but do not interrupt to offer advice. Let them come up with their own solutions to their problems. Really important. Number 3 is reflective. Being reflective and paraphrasing back what that person is telling you while bringing out those emotions. So let me give you an example. Let's say what you're saying is that you're really upset because Johnny broke your Lego set. That's really upsetting. I'm so sorry that you had to go through that, because I know how hard it is to work on those Legos. So you see, you're letting them know like what they're saying, what they told you. You're paraphrasing it in a different way, and you're bringing out those emotions. You're really upset. I see that you're angry because your brother took your doll from your room, and that's really upsetting you. And so again, you are sharing in a different way what they told you and bringing out those emotions. And bringing out emotions is really important in conversation, because emotions connect people, and it's like that point of connection. All humans have these emotions, right? So when we're able to connect to these hard emotions, we're able to feel understood. So that's really important. Okay, so now let's go over the
All right. So I really wanted to play this video because it just goes to show that through active listening and through these small changes, we're able to create a very emotionally safe environment for youth to be in, especially when we want them to open up to us, to collaborate with us, and to work with us. Because again, in terms of acknowledging power dynamics and how the socio context that they're navigating in, we want to ensure that the work we're doing is not only trauma informed, but also culturally aware. So I'm going to pass it off to Diana.
Thanks so much, Mohammed. Yes, thank you so much. And I appreciate you sort of wrapping up with that culturally responsive piece, right? Because I think a lot of times, primarily in therapeutic spaces, it's the therapist always has to be doing something, right? And sort of quote unquote filling up the space and talking and problem solving or helping to do things, right? Really kind of working with the youth in order to hear more information, things along those lines. And I think the video had a lot of great suggestions in terms of how to really do that active listening, but we also just want to take a moment to highlight that silence and those nonverbal communication is also a therapeutic tool. So as many of you put in the chat box earlier on, right, as we were hearing through the fireside chat, that even the very subtle body movements can convey something one way or another, right? The raised eyebrow, the tilted head when something is shared, maybe, looking out the window or whatnot, right? All of that is really conveying an information. So we wanted to just really highlight and focus on how using silence and nonverbal communication in a way that's really supportive and healing for youth. Because again, silence and nonverbal communication are therapeutic skills. So as you see here on the slide for providers, we've listed just a couple of things in terms of how we can help a provider or youth to really utilize silence and nonverbal communication. So for a provider, certainly allows you time to reflect on what was shared if the young person shared something with you, and how you want to respond given all that you know about the young person. What is that really individualized person-centered approach? So it's, asking what's a culturally responsive way to communicate. In a lot of cultures, the silences may be viewed as a sign of disrespect or disengagement. And yet in other communities, it's seen as a sign of respect, right? Of being very thoughtful about it. So how do you want to respond to that young person? And it really allows you sort of the space for you to also check in with you and how am I working with this individual in front of me? What makes most sense for them with the information that you have thus far? And then in terms of, how it could be beneficial for youth themselves, it allows them to really process their thoughts and emotions. And this is really important because a 7-year-old may be different than a 17-year-old in terms of how they're able to process that information, right? So giving them the time to really sit with what they're able to do, what's their capacity, whether it's age or anything else. If safety, discussed earlier, is created during your time together, it may result in the young person sharing more details, which really helps to fully process any traumas, any stressors, because they're not holding back. So again, as what was mentioned in the fireside chat, right, that I maybe didn't feel comfortable sharing some things, and there's other things that are happening that the provider isn't really able to help you with because there might be sort of this sense of feeling rushed or whatnot. So for youth, again, it also just helps to have that supportive opportunity to reflect on their experiences without judgment or shame or embarrassment, or a provider or a helper coming in and saying, that's unhealthy, that's X, Y, and Z, right? So you're creating that safe space for the youth to really process their emotions, their experiences, and come to terms with where they're at. And this is happening, because maybe they're not feeling rushed, right? If we're not trying to fill in every single second, every single moment of our time together because, we only have 45 minutes or 60 minutes, it might just feel too rushed, but that doesn't really allow for that therapeutic connection or that safety building, whether it's physically, emotionally, culturally. So taking, again, the step back really helps with that. And again, just what we do want to highlight is the importance of a youth not feeling pressured to share information that they're not ready. If and when they are ready to share, and part of that is how you set up the space, your connections together, that will allow youth to really share more information. And I think you can see through some of these examples here is that they really are rooted not only in being culturally responsive, but again, being trauma informed, right? Giving the space and the time for that youth to get to a point where they want to share information and they're ready to, as well as clearly being youth guided. So in order to help you sort of keep acting listening skills in mind, on the following slide, we have an acronym that we created that was created by actually one of our colleagues. So I'll share a little bit about it. We can hear a little bit maybe about it towards the end, but it's FOUR. FOUR will cover the first two and then the last two in the following slide, but FOUR stands for focus, observe, reflect, and respond. So again, it's important to be present with the young person you are working with in order to really focus your full attention on them. That can be demonstrated by minimizing any of these sort of like internal distractions, meaning any assumptions that we bring into the room. I know I remember hearing from back in the day, like social work 101, leave your stuff at the door, like the assumptions, the biases, right? But you have to actually be aware that you are carrying them implicitly, explicitly in order to enter that space with the youth, right? Also, eliminating any sort of external distractions, and those might be a little bit more sort of common for us, making sure your phone is on silent, making sure that there's no outside distractions either for you, but also for the young person. And then you also just want to observe the young person's body language, similar to what you might be conveying with your body language, whether subtle or not. The youth's body language can also convey something. So be aware or mindful of their choice of words, of their tone, as well as their nonverbal communication, right? If you're communicating, but they're looking out the window, they're raising their head, they're tilting, their eyebrow, you should definitely think about taking a step back, because it's probably not the response that you want unless you're, in the middle of processing some information and it's more intuitive on their end. So you can begin to genuinely partner with the person by building, again, that therapeutic relationship and picking up on any sort of deviations. Maybe they usually come in with a particular affect and now it's a little bit different. Maybe something has happened. Maybe there's a new stressor, things along those lines. And if you again are working towards creating that safe space, you can pick up on those things and start with, maybe from a point of curiosity, say, I'm noticing something different, and opening the door for that. And again, giving the young person the opportunity to share again, if and when they're ready. And for the last two letters of the acronym on the following slide, the first R, response to reflect. And this one really conveys trauma-informed care. So reflecting on what and how the young person is sharing. So we know that stressors and exposure to trauma may shape individuals' core beliefs, right? Down to the very core of how you view yourselves, of how maybe you view the people around you, the world around you, right? It brings a lot of questions into play. So this can obviously impact how they are able to cope. What coping skills are they using? They may not be healthy coping skills, but nonetheless, they are doing the best that they are doing in order to survive, right? And our goal is really to help you thrive. So again, being mindful and reflecting on what they're doing, how they got there, and what are the additional supports that youth might need so that, again, they're not just surviving, but really thriving. And your role is really to take that all in and process it at a deeper level. So it's not this sort of maybe superficial level communication when they're ready, but again, really focusing in on what's underneath all that once you've created that emotional, cultural safety, and so on and so forth. And the last R, respond. So you want to respond thoughtfully and empathetically. So using those active listening skills that were mentioned in the video. So also, for example, summarizing, paraphrasing, affirming, using open-ended questions, and a lot of the things that you already mentioned in the chat box. So using this also from a strengths-based perspective in your response, right? And you can also offer psychoeducation to the young person, to the family, when and if that young person is ready to learn as well. So it's not just about maybe them sharing things, but also learning things, right? Coming in judgmentally and saying that's not a coping or a healthy coping strategy, let's do this, is not going to work. And I think that's some of the things that we've been reiterating since part one and now into part two, as Mohammed was also mentioning, right? Like really giving youth the opportunity to guide their care. So key to all of that is really just to avoid any misunderstandings, again, to really partner genuinely and authentically with youth and their families if involved. So for that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague.
We can go to the next slide. All right, so one of the things that I thought was really important to draw attention to is to help youth thrive in session through safety and reassurance, and providing reassurance that a youth is safe to disclose important information. And when you establish this at the beginning of services and on an ongoing basis, especially when trust has been damaged, this can help to rebuild that trust. So it's really critical to then follow through on ensuring safety for the youth disclosure. And that means you got to inform them that you're a mandated reporter and what information you have to report before you report it. That way, the youth is thoroughly informed, it's been clarified, they have an understanding, and they don't feel like you're breaking their trust. They have that understanding that you're not trying to break their trust, but you have to follow specific rules. So I want to take a moment to circle back to the example I shared earlier related to my boyfriend who was significantly older than me. I kept this relationship a secret out of fear of judgment. But my counselor's response saying, if I'm judging you, I'm not doing my job right. And that is what made a huge difference. And that statement alone was reassurance of safety for things that I found vulnerable, sensitive, shame, secrecy, and just in an inability to trust any other adults in my life. Other ways that she has reassured safety was acknowledging how challenging it was for me to share something, and she would provide praise, not excessive, but very casual, and acknowledge that, like saying, it seems like it was really hard for you to share that. I appreciate you opening up to me about that. And that is also a very subtle way to provide reassurance of safety. So definitely something to take under consideration. I really encourage everyone to learn how they can provide reassurance of safety throughout any services they're providing. We can move to the next slide. So communication and overcoming cultural barriers and gatekeeping. We talked a bit more about this in part 1, but cultural barriers can still be experienced even when we're trying to be culturally responsive. And it's also important to acknowledge our own roles in cultural gatekeeping. So, cultural gatekeepers are individuals or institutions that control the flow of information, ideas, and behavioral norms related to their environment and their society. And this also goes off of your own personal bias and assumptions. In trying to give an example, there was a young person I was working with who had a very strong scent, and I didn't quite understand the scent. So initially, I thought that their hygiene was not being paid attention to. But later, when I had started understanding more about this family's culture, I just learned that some of the spices that they use in their food can impact their scent. And also, like some of those spices and herbs can be used for medicinal purposes and health purposes, such as skin tones and healing any damages on your skin. So when I had gone out of my way to understand cultural context without jumping to my own assumptions based on my own culture, I was then really able to create an environment of safety for this youth and know, okay, this is not their lack of hygiene, this is actually a cultural consideration. So I want us to take consideration for that. We've already talked about listening without judgment, but take it a step further. Validate the culture that shapes the youth's understanding of mental health, distress, healing, and family culture. And once we can do that, we're then going to respect that youth more. And when youth feel that their culture and their experiences are being validated and acknowledged, even if you have different cultures, can go a long way. So I really want us to understand how even when we feel confident or culturally competent in a specific area, ongoing personal education is critical to navigating different types of cultures and the unique experience of that person in their culture. We can move on. So, helping youth thrive in practice. The concept of effective awareness originates from emotional intelligence, but we've really reframed how this concept can show up. And it goes beyond the emotional aspect of providing treatment and services. It's really about looking at body language, communication, and other means of connection while working with the youth and families of different backgrounds. Effective awareness as a provider is actually even more important than effective awareness in the youth. Because if you, as the provider, are struggling with effective awareness, it's likely that you may not show up for that youth in the most beneficial way, even though you don't have negative intentions. So we can move to the next slide. All right, collaboration skills for partnership. Let's getting into some concrete actionable steps. So youth provider partnerships. With this, we really wanted to emphasize mutual respect and shared decision making following the framework of consistency and predictable. Earlier in the chat, someone mentioned that consistency is really important, and it's actually critical to have consistency when working with individuals who have trauma backgrounds, because they're so adjusted to unpredictable actions, behaviors, and they already may have a mistrust of whatever systems they're involved with, such as mental health. So we really want to emphasize how youth partnership creates an environment of safety across the board, which only helps to build rapport and increase the youth's trust and opening up. Move to the next slide. So then we have collaboration and action. And the thing with this is service planning needs to match shared decision making. They go hand in hand. And to create an authentic and meaningful partnership with youth, youth must have authority over themselves, their care, and specifically what it means to them and how it looks like. One of the things we as providers do need to consider is being transparent with them about the limitations they have related to policies and making sure that the youth is informed about that, such as being a mandated reporter and what that entails. And that's going to give more reassurance about the environment of safety because now they understand limitations or policies before any type of concern or event or detail that you need to report is shared. So it's really essential that as providers that it is about moving away from power over into power with in their dynamic. We can move on. So I really want us to check out this activity here in our case example. If you would like to take some notes, please put your responses in the chat. 2 questions I want to think about here is how could a provider's assumptions create barriers to engagement? And how does consent and clear roles support youth voice and collaboration? So the case example is, as your therapist, I will help you understand and manage your emotions, though I cannot change your circumstances. And I realize that I may sometimes make assumptions about what you are going to discuss, which we can address if it affects your comfort with me. Before we begin, I want you to know if you would like to participate in therapy and discuss any goals and different topics. Please know that you can ask questions or change your mind at any time. My role is to provide a safe, non-judgmental space and connect you to supports if you desire. While your role is to share what feels important, give feedback, and work with me to set goals. And we will begin each session with a brief check-in about what you felt helpful or unhelpful. So I'm going to take a minute to allow some people to respond in the chat related to these questions or any other thoughts that you had related to this case example. Okay, love how it is worded. Validating, for sure, there was validating in this example. Assumptions can cause a lack of trust. Absolutely. Assumptions can definitely cause a lack of trust because then the youth feels disrespected and unclear. Explaining things in a clear way. Of course, the wording is clear. Consent and clear roles allows for each participant to know what is expected and decide if they want to be a part of the experience, which is emphasizing autonomy. Absolutely. And we're really trying to build youth voice and choice in this. Validation, of course, it feels genuine and clear. Absolutely. Genuine, it goes back to authentic engagement. We like the message. The therapist may make assumptions and be open to feedback. Being open to feedback is really important when you're working with youth, and you want to actually invite their feedback. You want to give reassurance of that safety, saying something along the lines of, if I ever do something that makes you upset or uncomfortable, please let me know. Because a lot of young people are highly unlikely to vocalize that until it's invited and they're allowed time to think about that and reflect. Again, I see assumptions, see being honest, clear lines of communication for sure, clarity. I like how it is said that the therapist cannot change the circumstances, a discussion of what is possible and not possible. Yes, that's very, very important, especially when a youth is coming in and they want everything to be different. They want to even leave their environment, but that's not necessarily possible. Going on, providing a safe space to discuss assumptions and share feedback for sure. Collaboration, giving agency. Provider forms an early assumption impression. They may only notice what supports that assumptions and ignore contradictory information. Yeah, all of this feedback is beautiful. For the sake of time, we are going to move forward to the next slide, but I love everyone's reflections. So we want to see collaboration as an important aspect of trauma-informed engagement. And this is being very intentional on our thoughts and actions that support the building of relationships, communication styles, and recognizes trauma. So some of us may be familiar with the phrase, what happened to you versus what's wrong with you. And that is how we want to change our language, but not just the language. We have to change our thought pattern. So our automatic thought becomes what happened to you? And then how can I support you based on what happened to you? We want to consider that the perspective is that young person is doing the best they can. Even if we or the parents don't think they're doing their best, it is our job to hold space and have that unconditional positive regard and optimism that they are trying their best. And then progress isn't linear. That was something that was really important between me and my therapist, is because based on personal life events, I could have a mental health challenge or a crisis, but then it would be resolved and I would go back to baseline after a certain period. And holding space and her giving me reassurance that progress isn't linear was really important. When we're trauma informed, we have a lot of different interactions that we've practiced. And I'm not going to get too deep into these interactions because we really revisit these later on in strategies, and some of these might be more familiar with us. But then I want to lead into avoids. What does being trauma informed in our engagement avoid? It reduces power struggles. It challenges compliance-based care. So now we're not recognizing a resistance, we are recognizing caution. It stops the cycle of shaming, blaming, and just pathologizing survival behaviors, because what someone can deem as bad behavior can actually just be an automatic survival response. And then also taking under consideration historical, cultural, and systemic trauma. Trauma-informed engagement avoids ignoring those things. So also very important for us to consider. We can move forward. And I'll pass it to Kayla.
Thank you. We're going to move on to talk about family dynamics and relationships with youth and caregiver. We heard last in our first training, some of you bring up family dynamics, and we wanted to make sure to attend to them, as well as thinking about family ecology as barriers. We can go to the next slide. So in training one, we also talked about adultism, and I want to just revisit adultism and family therapy. So often a caregiver is really wanting to get their young person some help. In some perspectives, maybe they want me to fix their child, right? We know that there's so much more behind that sentiment. There's often a lot of fear from the caregiver about what's going on with their young person. There's also there's some difficult experiences. There's difficult relating. There's a lot of growth on the young person, like rapid growth during teenagehood and all of that. But I just want to visit like two kind of traps that we want to avoid, right? One is this trap, which we're calling parent-driven therapy, which is where the therapy is really driven by that parent or caregiver's desire to end certain behaviors that are bothering them or that are overwhelming them or that they know that are not healthy, right? Because that's not really partnering with the youth. And then at the same time, there's adultism in therapy where the therapist is really kind of coaxing the young person into doing what adults think is most ideal, right? And again, that's not really authentic partnerships. So we just want to start there as we move into thinking about like attending to family dynamics and authentic partnership. We can go to the next slide. We've talked a lot about safety. I'm going to talk about it in terms of the dynamics, right? So sometimes there's really rebellious or behavior choices that may not benefit the young person. And we want to make sure that we're attending to those, right? So we want to talk about what are those behaviors that I, as your provider, I'm going to have to talk to your parents about, right? Is there self-harm? Are there choices that where you're putting yourself in harm's way on a regular basis? And I'm going to have to talk to your caregiver about it to make sure that you're safe, right? At the same time, you're going to validate and support the youth's emotional perspective and really start to, and I'm sure you all are doing this, right? Understand the reasons for behavior choices. All behavior has meaning, all behavior. And so you really want to participate in an understanding with the young person about what their behavior is communicating. And then sometimes, and so someone in our last training brought this up. Sometimes there is some abuse that the young person may be experiencing, and sometimes at the hand of their caregivers. And so that's a really important conversation, as you all know, to have in the very beginning of care about confidentiality and safety, and when you may need to break that confidentiality and when you may need to really disclose some of their experiences to keep them safe. But you're always going to bring them into those conversations. You're always going to bring their caregivers into those conversations so that everybody's on the same page and that the participation in safety protocols is essential, right? We can go to the next slide. And then, of course, unconditional positive regard. So we've been saying this in a variety of ways, but I do think it's important to think about in this way, where I do want to describe the image. This image is highlighting the interconnectedness between acceptance, authenticity, and empathy, which is unconditional positive regard, right? That non-judgmental stance that Megan was talking about in her fireside chat. You're going to kind of think about that the youth isn't their behavior, right? That there's a difference. Communicate that acceptance in a variety of ways, whether it's nonverbal acceptance or verbal acceptance, and that you're collaborating, right? Next slide, please. And now I'm going to go over key strategies for addressing family dynamics. Families are a system, and systems are complicated, right? Systems are not simple. And that's what I love that word dynamic, because to me, it means layers, right? And so some of the strategies, we have about 6 strategies to talk about. One is to foster collaborative partnership. So you're actively involving caregivers in all of the communication and the planning. You're encouraging open communication between caregivers and their youth. You might hear my dog in the background, I'm sorry. Between caregivers and their youth, and open communication between you and the youth, right? You're going to provide psychoeducation consistently, where you're sharing what diagnoses may mean, what treatment may mean. You're going to continue to provide psychoeducation. Next slide. And then you're going to utilize family-focused services. So there may be multiple family groups, parent coaching, anything to really address the family dynamics and the systemic issues that may be impacting the youth's well-being and their functioning. You're going to address those practical barriers. You're going to adopt a trauma-informed approach, which is what Megan was just talking about, creating a safe, respectful environment to recognize family strengths, to recognize the strengths of the youth and maybe their siblings or maybe aunts or uncles or grandparents or whoever is really playing a role in the youth's life. And you really want to think about autonomy and agency. And then you're identifying and leveraging strengths. So focus on family existing strengths and build upon those. So we don't want to think about the pathology and the dysfunction. We want to think about the strengths, what's going well in the family, what's going well with the youth, and build upon that. Any thoughts around these strategies? Please chat in. Yeah, my dog did have a lot to say about this topic. Somebody chatted in, I know. Sorry about that. Yes, you're going to receive these slides. Sometimes young kids don't understand or can't name what they're, that's absolutely true. That is so true. That's why psychoeducation and open communication is really important for young people to understand the behavior that they're participating in, because sometimes we don't have that awareness, especially younger youth, right? And then two, what do we think it may mean? What's a need? Behavior expresses need, right? Okay, we can go to the next slide. And then we mentioned this in other slides around Thrive, helping you thrive. I want to really spend a moment just talking about helping youth and families thrive in mental health services, right? And in our provider youth relationship, in our agencies and our organizations. So active collaborative engagement, active family and youth involvement. I mentioned this in the strategies for family dynamics, and it is incredibly important because research tells us that it's not only bringing the youth into care, it's working alongside and involving caregivers and family members that have an active role in the youth's life. We want to continue to do that. We want to build trust and safety and have those strong trusting relationships between providers and families. We want to have, we mentioned open communication. We want to have personalized, comprehensive, and accessible care. So do we need to use telehealth so that the care is accessible for the young person? Can we use integrated care models? Are there some health challenges going on along as well? Can we have relationships with schools, right? That integrated care is really important as well. Reducing stigma. So tend to the barriers and the misconceptions. Normalize challenges and difficulties. And then promoting those resilience building skills. Again, building on those strengths. And then the next slide, in our last training, we ended with nurturing trust. And so I just want to revisit this topic of nurturing trust and how important it is. Nurturing trust in the young people you work with and nurturing trust in the families that you work with. Again, thinking about the environment of safety, physical safety, emotional safety, cultural safety. Megan talked a lot about that. Providing transparency in the care process. This is what we're going to do together. And this is what it looks like. And your participation is incredibly important, as is your caregivers. And this is what that means. And this is how we're going to do it, right? That transparency every step of the way. That's how you build that trust. That's how you build that safety. Acknowledge, praise. I cannot say enough about praise and how important it is to say, what a great job you're doing. Thank you for sharing that with me. That was really difficult. And I just want to thank you for doing that for both family and young people. Acknowledging and validating difficulties, acknowledging and validating, maybe people tried to do certain things after your session and it didn't go well. You can try again, right? Utilizing diverse opportunities and modalities for not only communication, but healing. Can you try some art or music or writing or other ways to verbally express challenges? And then providing age-appropriate information and psychoeducation about the diagnoses and the impact of traumatic experiences. So like I said, a 5-year-old's understanding of difficult experiences is very different often from a 15-year-old's, right? And so you all know this is just a reminder, but I just wanted to end here around thinking about nurturing trust in youth and families. Okay, we're going to wrap up by hearing from some key takeaways from Muhammad and Megan.
Yeah, so with us sharing our key takeaways, these are things we really want you, if you take nothing else away from this training, we want you to keep this information. So I encourage you to maybe take a note or two related to these key takeaways. So some of my key takeaways is really reframing resistance as caution, because youth can be cautious about a variety of different things, and we really want to reframe and hold space for that. So, and then youth become more cautious when they sense that you, as the provider, are being performative. And that brings us back to why authentic engagement is key to trust and rapport. One of the things I really think is important is that youth need consistent reassurance of safety when they are vulnerable. And this will help them feel more comfortable to disclose details about one thing and open up about other things. And then lastly, unconditional positive regard for youth and parents increases engagement and psychological safety. Unconditional positive regard can sometimes be difficult for us to do, especially when we've been having ongoing challenges or we don't think that the youth is making any progress. We want to continue to have unconditional regard and going with the assumption that they're trying the best they can, but they're still experiencing a lot of challenges to progress. So those are my primary key takeaways. I'll pass it over to Muhammad now.
Yes. And with that, I think it's also important for us to really engage in authentic engagement because it's not only a matter of ensuring that, youth are participating in the services in a more collaborative manner, but it's also to emphasize that, again, they are experts in their own self, their own experiences. Their experiences are valid, and we want to really emphasize by breaking down those power dynamics, by recognizing how, as providers, we may be engaging in adultism. And also thinking in terms of the long term, we also want to ensure that youth are able to understand these skills of understanding how they can voice their experiences, their concerns, how they can collaborate, how they can work with others, and also how they can recognize healthy dynamics, not only in the services that they're receiving, but also any other, relationship dynamics they might be navigating in as they are growing up, because we want to ensure not only is their expertise respected, but also their partnership is valued. And who knows, maybe they might become therapists later down the line, maybe they might become advocates down the line. But for themselves as youth, they recognize that if I'm respected now for my expertise and for my partnership, I want to continue that later on in life with others.
We can move to the next slide. All right, so we would like your engagement on a poll. This is our start, stop, and continue. What is something that you want to start doing after going through our training? What is something you want to stop doing that you may not have recognized before? And then what is something you want to continue? So if we could have that poll put up, and then you guys can take a second to go through these. We would really appreciate your feedback. And this is also for personal self-reflection. So you have an idea about what you want to do differently moving forward after learning this information.
This is great. Thank you for your participation. We have a few more seconds.
I see many people putting some of their responses in the chat, and that's completely okay because this is very much for your own personal reflection, just to give you a little bit more guidance. So whether it's completing the poll or just putting your answers in the chat, we very much approve and appreciate that engagement. And then, yes, slides will be made available within the next few business days. They will be on the CTAC website. I can't hot react to all of your responses because there's so many, but thank you so much for the engagement, guys. Does everyone feel ready to move on to the next question? Did everyone get a chance to review part 2 and part 3 of these questions?
It seems like why we have to put it in the chat is because it only the first question was able to populate for us.
Gotcha. I believe we just had poll 2 put up if you guys want to complete that.
Poll 2 is what's one barrier you'd like to overcome and stop participating in? Maybe you want to go back to the poll question number 3 slide.
Oh, number 2.
Poll question number 2. Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
Thank
Figure
you.
since we have the extra time.
These are good. I really appreciate the, you guys are doing some authentic self-reflection, and I hope this just ends up benefiting you moving forward. Do we feel ready to go to part 3 and put up the poll for that one? Okay, there we go. All right. Are we feeling all set with the 3 polls that were just for self-reflection?
Seems like some of you wanted to choose a few of these. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Thank you so much for participating in this and really taking a moment to reflect. We're going to move forward. So we do have 2 primary resources here. We have Combating Negative Health Stigmas, and that's a really good reference, really good resource for further reading. And then we also have Partnering with Families to enhance family-driven practices. And then there is also a webinar and resources on family-driven care. The responses for the polls did just pop up. And one of the things I'm noticing is there was a very equal aspect of what we want to continue. So it tells me that our strengths as providers are very well-rounded, and that is beautiful. We could move to the next slide, please. And then now our Q&A. If you guys could use the raise hand feature for any questions you may have or put those in the chat, I would greatly appreciate that. And if you have a question for one of us specifically, feel free to put our name there. Do we see any hands raised, any opportunities? For the resources for combating mental health stigma, is that a book or article? I'll leave that to Diana.
So if you log on to, am I on mute? No. So if you log on to our website, there are a couple of resources. It's not a book necessarily. It's a couple of things, handouts that you can do. There's a resource guide, but primarily it's more reading text, but not a super big book. But it does break it down in terms of tools for addressing stigma, just a lot of information. And I believe that there also is a webinar of sorts, but I'm having a little bit of difficulty on my end opening up the website. I apologize. What you'll also notice is that there also is a survey on that one. So I did see a comment come in. We will have a survey just to get your feedback in terms of how to improve, what information we need to add for this particular offering. But on the Stigma webpage as well, there is a survey because, again, you are all the individuals who are doing this work on the ground with youth, with adolescents, with adults, with families. So we do really value and encourage your feedback. So if you get a chance to look at that webpage, do encourage you to do so.
And then Digna, I see your hand raised. Feel free to ask your question.
Yes. Hi. Thank you. Thank you so much for this webinars. I learned so much. My clients are not 100% youth, but it's so much information. But I do have a question when parents are trying to impose or what they want to see on their 17-year-old going into college, always, or a father and a stepmother, I would say, and it's not allowing their daughter to actually do what she wants to do, but more focus on their own goals for their own wanting rather than what she really wants to do. How to address that precisely when you have a good relationship with the client, with the parents, but you're noticing this power struggle between parents and daughter? Can
Yeah,
somebody
that's
help
a
me with?
really valid concern. And, many clinicians can run into that. And that's an aspect of adultism and adult-led care based on the family dynamic. So I'll actually pass this question over to Kara or Diana to give us a little bit more perspective on working with the parents and the family.
This is a great question and so common. It's so common. I mean, think about I think about myself growing up, right? And my mom wanted me to go to nursing school. So I think it's so common that caregivers want their young people to be successful and they have their own idea of what that means, right? In our society. But yeah, I agree. Megan's point around this is adultism in practice, and how do we not participate in that? And I think it's ongoing conversation and building the young person's their agency and autonomy and understanding of what their desires are, and then how to communicate that, how to have really open and thoughtful communication with caregivers around that, right? And for caregivers and bringing caregivers into those conversations with the young person and understanding like this is what it feels like when you're wanting what you think is best, and then we understand where that comes from as opposed to what your young person is saying, right? And so it can be an opportunity to hold both things at the same time with the young person and their caregivers to really support them, right? This may be indicative of a lot of things, right? But really supporting them through that process of validating what they want and understanding how challenging it may be when it's not validated in their family. I think is really, really important. Diana, did you have anything to add?
No, I think you've pretty much covered it. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate so much for this, but it's just even like I said, I had meetings before with the family, all going well, but it comes lately in a way that parents saying, well, you don't appreciate what I'm doing for you and blah, 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 blah. And the teenager, well, I don't have a job. I'm trying to do the best I can. I don't know how to respond to my parents. What can I do? And she's frustrated. And I'm like, well, I get it. I get to you. I understand your feelings. And I literally schedule an appointment with their parents alone so we can talk about it. Do you recommend something like that, alone versus together?
It sounds like your judgment is great. I mean, it sounds like you're working with the young people and their caregivers, and you realize that maybe caregivers need a separate space. I think that's great. I also think you always got to bring them back together, though.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Say, your parents and I talked, and this is what we talked about. And it's that effective awareness, right? Building that effective awareness in caregivers, and building it in the youth, right?
Yes.
So what is behind this? You don't, this kind of lack of feeling like unappreciated, which every parent of a teenager has felt, right?
Exactly, exactly.
And so normalizing that, and also like what's helpful here? What's helpful? I can't stress to caregivers how much support young people need. Like we don't realize sometimes that our demands and our expectations may not be helpful.
Yes, and that is exactly what I address, and also talking with the teenager, that sometimes we don't know how to say thank you for the time that parents are taking and the efforts. Just be grateful and say, I am grateful for what you're doing and how you're supporting me, and the way you are dressing that is hurting me.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I think it's working very well, but I wanted to really have a little more feedback
Yeah.
from you,
I think
from the experts.
I also think it comes down to aligning goals, right?
Yeah.
It's like young person, your goal is this,
Uh-huh.
and caregiver, your goal is this. How do we bring those together? Right?
So for the sake of time, I do want to address two questions, Kayla and Diana.
Thank you so much.
There's
Thank
one question in the chat that I think you guys can
Yeah.
respond to in the chat.
I also saw
One of
someone's
the
hand was raised though. Momo's hand was
Ye-
raised.
Yes, that's one of the questions I'm going to
Okay,
get to. So
good.
real briefly, there was a question about when self behaviors are self-harm. I myself am a survivor of that. So when it comes to self-harm, of course, you have to disclose that as a mandated reporter, and we don't want the secrecy to get worse. In addition to that, when someone is self-harming, you want to go and address the emotional motivator for why they're self harming. That is the most important thing to do. And then offering coping skills options based on what they're interested in and what they find most comfortable. I talked about DBT or dialectical behavioral therapy last week. You don't have to be certified in that in order to incorporate some of those coping skills. So I really just wanted to touch base on that, but you're welcome to email me directly for more guidance on that. And then Momo, you had also raised your hand. Would you like to ask a question?
Hi, yes, my name is Momo. I'm the clinical support at Jamaica Youth Act. And this was mentioned before, but it could be touched on um, probably within my team or within people's groups, and we can touch back on it like much later on. But um, I've been ruminating on this question that was asked before about, if a youth is in crisis. Um, I know from what I understand, we try to de-escalate as much as possible to sort of prevent having to involve like outside forces like, I don't know, police or like CPS. And so I'm just curious to know, in what situations do you think it warrants like those sorts of interventions? And if anything, what are best practices so that it doesn't have to escalate that far to sort of, and sort of involve like police or like CPS or other things that could be traumatizing and might actually not help the situation or make the youth really feel like safe in terms of like confiding with like us, things like that. So that's my main question.
Thank you, Momo. Well, first, I do want to say that for Youth Act, you do have a team-based approach, right? So some of these questions, and I actually would love to hear an example. I don't know if we have time, but some of these questions or concerns that you have, the beautiful part about Youth Act work is you work as a team. And so hopefully the other members of your team, the leaders and other people are talking about this and what's best. I think involving external systems always puts everybody at risk, and it may be necessary sometimes for safety, right? So I'm balancing those things. I also want to just put a little call out there to Youth Act has clinical support calls on a monthly basis. So you could also join those calls for Youth Act members. Anybody have other thoughts? Megan, Muhammad, Diana?
Yes. I also want to highlight that, before the external sources are utilized, even speaking with the youth, either like in the beginning sessions, in terms of setting up like some sort of safety plan and really recognizing who are people in their community, in their immediate circle that can also step in before, external like crisis intervention or police are need to be called. So that way they can speak with someone familiar to them they already feel safe with before that step is taken. And so that way you're utilizing that already existing support circle without necessarily having to create a new one altogether.
Great, thank you so much. I do recognize that we are at time. Just a reminder, folks, we'll have the slides in 3 to 5 business days. There was a chat, the link through our survey put in the chat box earlier. We'll do that again. Again, please take the time to fill it out. We just want to highlight an upcoming offering for next month, the basis of trauma-informed violence screening and assessment with youth and families. Certainly visit our website for any future and past trainings. And on that final slide, a huge thank you to you all for attending, a huge thank you to our presenters. And again, the link to the survey has been posted. Please take the time to fill it out now, or just keep it open in your tab so you can take a look at it later on today. But again, on behalf of CTAC and our presenters today, Megan, Muhammad, Kara, Felicia helping us out on the back end, thank you so much and have a great weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.